knocking firmly on the door of the apartment on the fourth floor. I said, "Robert McDonald, this is your wife. The woman you've been with for the last 25 years. I am the mother of your two sons and the person who loves you more than my own life. I have always loved and will always love you. But I have a love story to tell you, and it involves me and someone else. After everything we've meant to each other all these years, you should give me time to listen to me. I'll be downstairs cooking dinner and waiting. You can eat and then listen to my story," I said through the tightly closed door. About an hour later, he came down for dinner. I prepared expensive steaks and a nice bottle of Cabernet. We ate and I started. I told him from the bottom of my heart. She didn't lie or hide. Hiding the truth from Rob was over. I met a wonderful person who was there for me when I needed help. First, he helped me sexually when I was in a terrible situation, and then he took care of me and our children when I was left alone. I began. I sat there, saying nothing, as Karen told me the whole story, how after the birth of our second son, she became dead from the waist down, how she met Philip, and how he awakened her sexuality. She didn't hide anything. I remembered the night I came to bed and found the book The Joy of Sex that Karen had brought home. She told me she wasn't what she could be as a lover after Oscar was born and wanted to be proactive. Now I know that this book was just a cover for her affair with Philip. What she showed me in bed did not come from this book. These were the things Philip taught her. She then told me how she brought him into our home, into our bed on the same day she took me to the airport in 1990. I was then assigned to the U.S. Eisenhower to participate in Operation Desert Shield, which later became Operation Desert Storm, the war to liberate Kuwait from Saddam Hussein. The only thing that kept me going in the dark was the confidence that a loving wife and two boys were waiting for me at home. Now, 2 decades later, I have learned that this is not true. And this bitch didn't even have the decency to wait until I was abroad. Now I knew why Karen and the children spent part of Christmas 1990 in Montreal, and I knew the real reason for her periodic trips there. I should have realized this sooner, but I trusted her. I also learned why my relationship with my two sons had deteriorated. She had apparently silenced them and used them to hide the affair from me. I saw the signs when I returned from Iraq, but did not draw any conclusions. I may have had what some call a confirmatory bias. I could never imagine her cheating on me, so I dismissed the idea. Apparently, Karen was right that I needed a guide to get through the relationship. She chatted on, enjoying her romance with Philip, constantly telling me that it had nothing to do with her feelings for me. Although the physical part of their relationship ended many years ago, she still had a strong emotional attachment to him and his family. Her story opened my eyes to many things I had been wondering about for years. Now everything has become crystal clear. As she spoke, I felt my blood pressure begin to rise. Part of me wanted to kill her, but I knew it would only get me a trip to jail. I listened while she spoke as if it were some kind of romantic story. In her head, she had done nothing wrong and still considered herself a faithful, loving wife. Finally, she stopped. "Now, it's time for us to pick up the pieces and continue our life together," she said. "We can overcome this, just like we overcame everything else." I looked at her without saying anything. After what I had just heard, there was nothing more to say. "Say something, Rob," she begged. "Please. I still love you. I never stopped loving you." I stood up from the table and pulled my chair back to the table. I looked at her for a few moments before speaking. "Thank you for dinner," I said quietly. "Good night." I went back upstairs to the fourth-floor apartment where I was hiding. "Good night?" she asked. "Is that all you can say, after I poured my soul out to you?" I stopped and looked at her. "For now," I said. "I have a lot of information to comprehend." I went back upstairs, closed the apartment door, and placed a chair against the doorknob to hold it outside. I sat down on the bed and cried. The life I knew is over. My marriage had been a lie for the past 20 years or more, and my wife, the one person I loved more than anyone else, expected me to simply accept her years of infidelity. She knocked on the door a little later. "Rob," she asked, "are you okay? We need to talk, honey." Go away," I said. I finally fell asleep, but it wasn't easy. Then the nightmares started again. The F-14 Tomcat I flew to Riyadh the day before Operation Desert Storm began was sluggish, and I felt like something was wrong. One moment, we were flying over 20,000 feet at twice the speed of sound. The next moment, we were without power and falling quickly. The pilot initiated an engine restart, but nothing happened. He tried again, with the same result. I told it to restart again, but nothing happened. Then I had an idea and told him to turn off the fuel and try again. "This is crazy," he said. "Do it now," I ordered. In real life, the plane launched and we barely escaped. The problem turned out to be contaminated fuel, and I found out about it by chance. We fixed the problem, saving many lives in the process. Unfortunately, this did not happen in my nightmare, and I woke up with a start as soon as the plane hit the water. I wonder if it had anything to do with Karen. The next day I woke up early and went to work without telling Karen. I was part of a team working on a new jet engine for the military. The university where I worked received an annual grant to develop a next-generation engine for integration into some of the new aircraft that were being developed. If it were successful, the new engine could, in theory, propel the plane into orbit. Lisa, one of my assistants, pulled me aside during lunch and started talking to me. "Okay, Rob," she said, "spit it out. What's going on with you?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied. "Nonsense, Rob," she answered decisively. "I've worked with you for too long. Something is gnawing at you. What's happening?" She caught me, and I knew it, so I told her the whole story. "Oh my God," she said when I finished. "No wonder you've been like a zombie for the last few weeks. What are you going to do?" I shook my head. "I don't know," I said. She said that the physical part of their affair ended some time ago, but she still has a strong emotional attachment to him, even though he died. Part of me wants to divorce her and move on, but the other part says otherwise. I still love her despite everything. Damn, I hate this. What would you do? "If it were me, I would have kicked her ass out the moment she confessed," Lisa said. "But it's me. You need to get your head out of your ass and deal with this. Stop analyzing it like a jet engine and deal with it." "Do you think that's what I do?" I asked. "Am I analyzing the situation?" "Of course," she said. "That's how you always deal with things. But it's not something you can break down into a series of equations. What are your instincts telling you to do? Once you realize it, deal with it and move on." She got up and threw out the trash. "You can contact me anytime you need, Rob, but do something and quickly. We need you back in the game here." She left, leaving me with my thoughts. Lisa was right, and I knew it. I worked late, mostly to avoid going home. I ate a small piece of the leftover meatloaf I had brought from home and continued to think about what Karen had told me. Finally, around 11 p.m., I headed home. When I walked in, I saw Karen and Avril sitting on the couch. "You're finally home," Karen said. "I was busy," I said, heading towards the stairs to my apartment. "Avril is staying here with us this week to work on the exhibition," Karen said. She had told me the day before that they were planning to have an exhibition of Philip's work in one of the major art galleries in the city. The exhibition was supposed to start early next year, and they planned to take it all over the world. "Whatever," I said. "And just so you know, we intend to make my portrait the centerpiece of the exhibition," she said. I stopped and looked at her. "What?" I asked. "Not only did you humiliate me with that bastard while I was at war, with our children no less, but now you're going to rub my nose in this by showing it. This to the whole world." "This is a wonderful piece," said Avril. "Your wife is a wonderful woman, isn't she? You should be proud to show it to the world." I shook my head. "Proud?" I asked her, trying to keep my voice even. I could feel my blood pressure rising again. Should I be proud of the fact that my wife is having sex with another man in my bed with our children just a few meters away in another room? And now I should be proud that she rubs my nose with her adultery in front of the whole world. "You are crazy." "Please, Rob," Karen began. "Get away from me, both of you," I said. "You disgust me. Just leave me alone." "Please don't be upset," Avril begged as I walked upstairs. I didn't want to listen to them anymore. I closed the door to my apartment, locked it, and placed a chair against the doorknob. The women followed me and tried to talk to me through the door. "Rob," Karen begged, "please come out and talk to us. Please." "What part of 'leave me alone' don't you understand?" I asked. "Rob, let us erase the pain and suffering," Avril said. "Get the hell out," I shouted, feeling pain in my chest. I heard them leave, silently crying. Cursing was rare for me, and I always tried not to swear in front of Karen, so I knew my outburst had upset her. Too bad, I thought. I sat on the bed and took a deep breath, hoping to ease the pain. After a few minutes, the physical pain subsided a little, but the emotional pain was still there. I lay down on the bed, still in my clothes, and thought about my options. Divorce was my first option, although it was something I didn't want to think about. I knew that New York was a no-fault state, and I also knew that marital assets would be divided equally. I decided that if it came down to it, I would give Karen the house, since it meant nothing to me anymore after she was with Philip in our bedroom while I was abroad. All the years of work to renovate this place were in vain gone, but I had to make Karen understand what she did to me. In her head, she was completely right, and did not feel any guilt for cheating with Philip. Then it dawned on me. I still had my old pump shotgun in the back of the closet. I found it still in the case where I kept it. It hasn't been used for over 10 years. I pulled it out along with a box of cartridges in a case. She was still slippery from the last lube. I tested the pump action, and it still worked well, so I sat down and thought about my next move. For a moment, I actually thought about shooting myself in the head. In my mind, I was already a dead man walking thanks to Karen. I dismissed the thought because I had always considered suicide to be a cowardly act. I could, of course, shoot Karen, but that would only put me behind bars, and I didn't want to be a beating boy in prison. Then it dawned on me. The painting is the same one that Karen and Avril loved so much, a picture drawn by them, a bastard. The bastard who got into Karen's heart in his smooth, seductive ways. Luckily, Karen was smart enough to put this mess in the back closet, but it's still there, mocking me. And now Karen was going to make me a laughingstock in front of the whole world with this thing. This will be my goal. I loaded the shotgun and listened to make sure the two women were sleeping. Hearing nothing, I quietly went downstairs and headed to the back closet. I opened the door and saw her leaning against the back wall, covered with a blanket. I lifted the blanket and looked at her one last time. Yes, Karen was beautiful in that picture, I thought. As I told Avril when she first showed her to me, a beautiful woman of easy virtue. But it was clear that her smile was intended for her lover, not for me. My anger rose, and so did my blood pressure. I cocked the first cartridge and, taking aim, fired straight into her face. I continued to cock and fire, destroying the rest of her image piece by piece. By the time the cartridges ran out, her image had completely disappeared from the painting. I threw the empty shotgun on the floor and began hitting the painting, tearing it apart with my hands and feet. Despite the pain in my chest, I picked up the pieces and headed for the large gas fireplace in the front room, Karen and Avril following me, yelling for me to stop. While the women cried and begged me to stop, I threw the torn picture into the fireplace and turned it on. The canvas immediately caught fire, and I stood back to admire my work. I took off my wedding ring and threw it into the fireplace, but it bounced off the brickwork and landed somewhere in the living room. I didn't care. I turned to the women, who were sobbing inconsolably, but their cries did not reach my ears. I wanted to say, "Now you know how I feel," but I didn't have time to finish the sentence. My vision blurred and pain shot through my left arm. I felt nauseous and had difficulty breathing. Falling to the floor, I silently prayed for death to take me away from this hell. I woke up and saw a man in a doctor's coat standing over me with a clipboard in his hands. He looked at me and smiled. "Mr. Ben McDonald, glad to see you conscious," he said. "We almost lost you several times. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry and my lips seemed stuck together. My chest also hurt terribly." "Everything is all right," said the doctor. "Just relax. Don't try to talk now." He waved to someone out of my sight, and I fell asleep again. I woke up again to see the nurse in my room. I got her attention and tried to explain that my mouth was dry. She gave me a piece of ice to suck on, and I was finally able to say something. "My chest hurts terribly," I tried to say. She nodded, indicating that she understood what I was trying to say. "It's all right, Mr. McDonald," she said. "They had to give you CPR, so your chest will hurt for a while." She gave me another piece of ice, and I enjoyed it for as long as I could. She added something to my Roman 4, and I started dozing off again. I woke up again to see the doctor in my room, checking my vital signs. Karen and Avril were also in the room, sitting on the couch under the window that overlooked the city. The doctor examined me before speaking. "How are you feeling, Mr. Bullet McDonald?" he asked. "My chest hurts like hell," I said, sucking on a piece of ice, trying to moisten my mouth. The doctor nodded. "It's normal," he said. "Paramedics performed CPR on you and used a defibrillator several times. Your breasts may hurt for a while." He checked my blood pressure and pulse rate before sitting down next to me. "How are you doing?" "What do you have in mind?" I asked. "Well, for starters, we didn't find any signs of blockage," he said. "But we noticed that your heart has changed shape." He placed the X-ray on the viewing screen in the room and then placed another one next to it. He pointed to the second photo. "This is an X-ray of a normal heart," he said. "And this is yours," he added, pointing to the second photograph. I had to admit that they looked completely different. Mine resembled some kind of vessel lying on its side, with one side seemingly sticking out. "I've read about it, and, to be honest, I've only seen it in a couple of other patients," he said. "This is called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or weakening of the main chamber of the heart, which usually occurs as a result of severe emotional or physical stress. This is also called broken heart syndrome. Tell me, Mr. McDonald, has anything extremely stressful happened in your life recently? Perhaps the loss of a loved one?" Karen started crying when the doctor said this. He looked at her for a moment, then back at me. "Perhaps we should invite one of our consultants to talk to you," he said. "Will he be okay, doctor?" Karen asked through tears. "With the right treatment, I think so, Mrs. McDonald," said the doctor. "However, his recovery may take several months. We've put him on some medications, beta blockers and aspirin, and we'll see how he responds to them. We'll know more when the consultant talks to him. In the meantime, I suggest doing everything possible to reduce his stress levels." "Thank you, doctor," she said as he left the room. After the doctor left, Karen and Avril came to my bed. I looked at Karen before speaking. "Why?" I wheezed. "I already told you why I fell in love with Philip," she said. I shook my head and waved my hand, dismissing her statement. "No," I said. "Why did you let me live?" Her face turned pale. "You already killed me. You should have just let me die." Both women began to cry again. "Please just leave," I said. "You've hurt me enough." "Please don't say that, Rob," Karen said through her tears. "Don't you know how much I love you? I'll die without you. I'll be back, Rob, and I promise I'll fix this. Please don't hate me." At this time, one of the nurses entered the room, accompanied by another woman in a medical gown. The nurse led Karen and Avril out of the room and closed the door, leaving me alone with the other woman. She rolled a chair to my head and sat down. "My name is June, Mr. McDonald," she said. "Dr. June Carstairs. I have been asked to come and talk to you to find out what might be causing your heart problem. Do you mind if I record our conversation?" "Not at all," I said. "Thank you," she said, starting the recording with an introduction. "Please tell us about yourself." I told her a short version of my life and a little about my work at the university. "So stress is a normal part of your job," she said. "Understand. What about your home life?" I told her everything, how Avril came with the portrait and threw what was effectively a nuclear bomb into what I thought was a relatively good marriage. I also told her, as best I could, what Karen had told me about her relationship with Philippe Dumont. She listened calmly, taking notes, sometimes asking clarifying questions. I also told her about how Karen planned to rub my nose in cheating with this picture. "And that led to the shotgun incident?" she asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. I see, she replied. She asked a few more questions and wrote down my answers. I will need to speak with your wife before I make my report with recommendations to Dr. T. Allen, she added. Meanwhile, you need to rest. If you feel the need to talk, just call one of the nurses, okay? I nodded again. Thank you, I said, feeling exhausted. I fell asleep after she left. The next day, Dr. Allen said that I could be transferred from intensive care to a private ward. I let the nurses and aides do their thing, and soon I was lying in a real bed in a small but cozy room. It was nice to be out of the and I was able to really relax. I didn't see Karen or Avril that day, but Lisa and some other colleagues from the university came to see me. Lisa brought me a paper airplane, thinking it would cheer me up. I smiled at the gift, even though I really hate airplanes. Well, I told myself, the main thing is attention. After I ate a black bean burger, the hospital insisted that I strictly adhere to their cardio diet. I watched silent TV and dozed off. Karen. 3 days had already passed, and everything was in a fog. It all started the night Rob had a heart attack. Avril and I had just fallen asleep when we heard the first shotgun blast downstairs. The security system didn't work, so I thought Rob had decided to commit suicide. The first shot followed another, then a third and a fourth. What was Rob doing, I asked myself. Avril and I ran downstairs and saw Rob in the back closet. He shot at my portrait. We both shouted at him to stop, but he ignored us and continued to shoot. Holding our ears, we watched as he systematically destroyed my naked image in the portrait. When the cartridges ran out, he threw the shotgun on the floor and began to tear at the frame, tearing it apart with his hands and feet. When he finished, he collected the pieces and ran into the front room. We followed him, begging him to stop, but he was like one possessed. We watched in horror as he threw the pieces into the fireplace and turned it on. We cried inconsolably as we watched the beautiful portrait created by Philip turn into ashes. Rob then took off his wedding ring and threw it as hard as he could into the fireplace. I saw it bounce off the brickwork and land somewhere in the living room. I remembered where it fell so I could find it later. He turned towards us and looked like he was about to say something, but then fell down, unconscious. I quickly grabbed my phone to dial 911 while Avril tried to turn off the fireplace, but it was too late. The portrait was completely destroyed. Paramedics arrived very quickly. We watched as they performed CPR and loaded him onto a stretcher. They told me which hospital they would take him to and left. Avril and I quickly got dressed and headed to the emergency room. We're told Rob had some kind of heart attack and doctors are working on it. We waited for what seemed like an eternity until the doctor came out to talk to us. "Mrs. McDonald?" he asked. I nodded, and he led me to a small room near the waiting room. "Your husband had cardiomyopathy. We almost lost him several times, but were able to revive him. He is transferred to the cardiac intensive care unit. Once his condition has stabilized, the nurse will call you." "Will he be okay?" I asked. "We are doing everything possible for him," the doctor said. I sat down and cried. Did I really do this to him? Did I push him too hard and expect him to accept more than he was capable of? I had never seen Rob get aggressive before, and I certainly didn't think he was capable of something like shooting at my portrait. Avril held my head, silently supporting me. Several hours passed before the nurse came out and escorted us to the intensive care unit. When I looked at everyone, it seemed that everyone knew that my betrayal put my husband in the hospital. Nobody said anything, but the accusing glances burned my soul. I almost lost my composure when I saw him for the first time. He looked 10 years older, his eyes were sunken, his skin a sickly gray tint. We sat watching the monitors, hoping for some sign that he was still with us. While we sat there, nurses came in to check his vital signs and adjust his medications. We dozed off a few times, and one of the nurses suggested we leave and come back in a few hours. But I refused. I wasn't going to leave my husband when he needed me most, at least not more than once. Avril and I took turns, one sleeping while the other watched and waited. We were there for about 30 hours when Dr. D. Allen came in with a nurse. He talked to Rob for a bit before putting a couple of X-rays on the screen for him to view. He explained that Rob had Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. I've heard about this before. The name comes from a pot that Japanese fishermen use to catch octopuses. This condition occurs due to severe emotional tension or stress. I was about to die when Dr. Allen asked if anything extremely stressful had happened recently. I burst into tears when he asked Rob if he had lost someone close to him. Yes, I thought. It's me. I did this to him. Avril held me while I cried. I asked the doctor if he would be okay and was told that with proper treatment and stress reduction, he should be okay, but it could take months. He also said that he would bring in a consultant to talk to Rob. This was a good idea, I thought. Maybe a counselor can help Rob overcome his feelings. I thanked the doctor when he left. Avril and I went to Rob's. When I looked at his face, I saw a sadness that I had never seen before. I was surprised when he asked me, why? I thought he wanted to know why I fell in love with Philip, but he shook his head and waved his hand. No, he said. Why did you let me live? I was shocked to the core. You already killed me. You should have just let me die, he said. We both started crying again. Please just go away, he said. You've hurt me enough. Please don't say that, Rob, I said through my tears. Don't you know how much I love you? I'll die without you. I'll be back, Rob, and I promise I'll fix this. Please don't hate me. I meant everything I said, but I wondered how I could make it up to him. How could I make him understand that I needed him? For the first time, I truly began to realize what my affair with Philip had done to him, and I felt terrible. My God, I thought, I did this to him. The nurse came back into the room with another woman in scrubs, and they escorted Avril and me out of the room, telling me to come back the next day. I was unable to drive, so Avril drove us home. We showered, ate, then went to bed, physically and mentally exhausted. Avril was so sweet, so supportive. I truly felt blessed to have her in my life at that moment. We lay in each other's arms and fell asleep. I dreamed that I was standing in a circle of light. I looked around, but didn't see anyone. Then several large heads appeared in my field of vision. I recognized them from the photographs Rob showed me. They were members of his family. I recognized his father, his mother, and some other members of his family. They looked at me, angry, condemning. His father's face spoke. You killed him, Karen, said the face. I shook my head. No, I said. You do not understand. What I had with Philip was wonderful. No, said the father's face. You broke his heart. He loved you with all his heart. He trusted you. So what did you do? Please, I begged. I needed Philip. You do not understand. I understand too well, said the father's face. Your husband almost died in this war, but that wasn't enough for you, right? You planned and cheated and deliberately broke his heart. You brought this man to his house. You brought him to his bed. You turned his children against him. You destroyed everything he held dear. You killed him. No, I begged, crying. Please try to understand. You are guilty, declared my father's face, looking at me angrily. Guilty, the other faces said in unison. Guilty, guilty. I woke up scared and saw Avril lying next to me, her eyes open. SHH, she whispered, holding me tightly. It was just a nightmare. It wasn't real. Go back to bed. She held me while I cried and fell asleep. No matter what she or anyone else said, deep down in my heart, I knew those faces were right. I was guilty, and a good man almost died because of me. The next morning, I got up, showered, got dressed, and went downstairs. Avril was already up and making breakfast for us. I poured myself a cup of coffee and ate mindlessly. After that, we talked about the exhibition, but my heart wasn't in it. All I could think about was the look I saw on Rob's face the day before. Your portrait has been destroyed, Avril said. It was supposed to be the central element of our exhibition. What will we do now? I shook my head. I don't know, I said. We'll figure something out. Fortunately, our conversation was interrupted by a telephone call. It was Dr. Fung Carstairs, and she wanted to talk to me this morning about the events that led to Rob's heart attack. We need to get back to the hospital, I told Avril after the call ended. Why? She asked. They want to talk to me about what happened, I said, going upstairs to change clothes. An hour later, we arrived at the hospital parking lot and went to Dr. Delay Carstairs' office. Dr. Carstairs, she said she wanted to talk to me alone first, so Avril stayed in the waiting room. I want to discuss the events that led to your husband's incident, she told me after closing the door. Do you mind if I record our interview? I shook my head and watched as she pulled out a digital audio recorder and took some notes. When she was ready, she looked at me. Please, she said, start from the very beginning. I told her everything as I had told Rob the day before, how I met Philip and how he awakened my sexuality. I told her about how I brought Philip into our house the day Rob went off to war, and I left nothing hidden. I even told her about the events surrounding the painting that Rob had destroyed and how I periodically traveled to Montreal to see my lover. I also told her how I enlisted the children to keep my life with Philip a secret from their father. Dr. Carstairs was very professional, taking notes while I spoke. She could be a great poker player, I thought. She showed no emotion while I spoke and did not do or say anything that might indicate approval or disapproval of my actions. She didn't say anything until I finished. So do you feel any remorse or guilt for your actions? She asked. At first, no, I said. I am still a good wife and mother. I see, she said, making a note on her notepad. And how did you expect your husband to react to your affair? I hoped he could forget about it, I said. I thought that after the new year we could go to counseling, and over time he would forget about it and move on. Philip is dead after all. So just so I understand correctly, she said, you engaged in a long-term physical and emotional affair with another man, brought that man into your marital bed while your husband was overseas fighting, and expected your husband to simply shrug his shoulders and act as if nothing had happened. Right? It sounded so nasty the way she explained it, but she was mostly accurate. What more could I say? Well, I began, this is basically how I imagined it. Has your husband ever been violent before? Asked the doctor. I shook my head. No, never, I said. Rob is somewhat shy and introverted. He tends to keep everything to himself until he has fully analyzed it in his mind. I've never seen him lose his composure. You mentioned the beginning of the year, said the doctor. Why wait for a consultation? Is there anything special at the beginning of the year? Avril Dumonte, Philippe's wife, and I are preparing an exhibition of his works, I said. The portrait that Rob destroyed was supposed to be the centerpiece of this exhibition. I thought we could forget about the past before the exhibition ended. I see, said Dr. Carstairs. And you intended to display the picture, which is proof of your betrayal, to the whole world, right? Mostly, I said, feeling ashamed. She said, making a note on her notepad. How would you describe your husband's relationship with your children? She asked. I think it's like most fathers and sons, I said. They're a little tight now. Rob doesn't talk to them much. Did you encourage them to keep your affair a secret? Asked the doctor. Yes, I said quietly. And you don't think that this could affect their relationship? I didn't think it would have such an impact at the time, I said. And now? Asked the doctor. I don't know, I answered. One more question, Mrs. Hayes MacDonald, the doctor continued. If you could go back, what would you do differently? Honestly, I asked. I don't know. I think under the same circumstances, I probably would have done the same thing. Even knowing what it will do to your husband, she asked. I had to think about this question. You must have known Philip, I said. I see, she replied. So will my husband be okay? I asked. You need to talk to his doctor, she replied. Can I go to him now? I asked. She shrugged. Of course, if you really want to, she said. I answered that I wanted to and quickly left her office. I felt her gaze burning into my back as I walked away. I took Avril and we went to Rob's room. Slave. After a normal night's sleep, I woke up and saw one of the hospital staff carrying my breakfast. I ate it and a nurse came over to take my vital signs and took me to an X-ray for my daily check. After returning to the room, another nurse came over to escort me around the ward. The doctor said he wanted me to walk around the ward at least twice a day to gain strength. I went back to my room and got into bed when Karen and Avril arrived. "How do you feel?" Karen asked, approaching my bed. "Not as bad as yesterday," I replied. "You look better than yesterday," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "That's good, I guess," I said. "Of course, that's good," she replied. "I need you to come home as soon as possible. I miss you, you know." "I'm sure," I answered in a neutral tone. She looked at me, surprised. "It's true," she said. "I love you and miss you. I know you probably don't believe me, but it's the truth." "You're right," I said. "I do not trust you, but I appreciate the feeling." Avril came to my bed, angry. "How can you talk to your wife like that?" she said. "She cried all night because of you." "Because of me?" I asked. "Please don't insult my intelligence." "I dare not do such a thing," she said. "But I have to wonder why you destroyed such a beautiful piece." "Do you mean that picture?" I asked. "Of course," she answered. "It wasn't a work of art," I said. "It was just a picture of a beautiful woman of easy virtue, painted by her lover to serve as a constant reminder of her betrayal. A true work of art is what Karen and I had before she met your husband. The two of them destroyed this piece of art, and I understand you helped, as is your whole family, and my two sons too." "Please don't talk about your wife like that," Avril said as Karen wiped her eyes. "Look at her. She still loves you. Can't you put aside your pride and let her love you?" "You don't understand, Mrs. Chiudumonte," I said, deliberately using her married name. "A successful marriage requires more than love. Loyalty, devotion, and trust are required. Karen and I swore an oath before God and everyone that we would be faithful to each other until death. I kept my end of the deal. She doesn't. Even worse, she lied to me for 20 years. It may mean nothing to you, but it means everything to me. And Karen knew it when she lay with your husband." "You make it all sound so depraved," Avril said. "Because it was depraved," I replied. "You can't forgive your wife's mistake?" she asked. "A mistake?" I asked again. "A mistake is accidentally leaving milk on the table overnight or turning right instead of left. What she did went beyond a simple mistake. She betrayed me in the worst way a woman can. She turned our marriage into a mockery. Then she lied to me for 20 years to cover it up and got our children involved in it. Besides, she doesn't think she did anything wrong. How can I forgive someone who thinks he is as pure as the first snow?" I turned my attention to Karen. "Tell me something, dear wife," I said. "What would you do if the roles were reversed? Let's say you came home one day and found someone you've never met on our doorstep with a portrait of a naked woman, only to find out that I've been sleeping with her for 20 years. Would you just forget about it and expect us to carry on as if nothing happened?" "Honestly." "You have a point, Rob," she said. "I honestly don't think I could ever forgive you for that." "But that's exactly what you want from me," I said. "Let's move on. Let's say I told you that I wanted to put this nude portrait on display to audiences around the world to show off the woman I cheated on you with. Would you accept it?" "No, of course," she answered. "And let's say I would involve the boys so that they would keep this little betrayal a secret from you," I continued. "Would you agree with this?" "Hell no," she said. "And finally, let's say that this woman's family came and tried to convince you that it was wonderful that I found this amazing woman who helped me through a difficult time and told you to just suck it up and accept it," I said. "Could you do this?" "You know not, Rob," she replied. "But that's exactly what you expect from me," I said. "So, to sum it up, you're telling me there's one set of rules for you, but a different set for me. This is true? Please, Karen, for once, be honest with me, if you can." "Okay, Rob," Karen said with irritation in her voice. "You made your point. Is there any way for us to move forward at all?" "I honestly don't know, Karen," I replied. "Can you undo the last 20 years or so? Can you prove to me that I can trust or believe in you again?" She didn't have time to answer this question because there was a knock on the door. "Hello?" A male voice rang out. "Can I come in?" Come in, I said. Admiral Dan Dickerson peered through the door before entering. The last time I saw it was in 1992, when the U.S. Eisenhower was heading to Norfolk for repairs. With him were two junior officers, Commander Jack Marlowe and Lieutenant Allison Patrick. Something told me that these people were as military as our house cat, but I didn't say anything. "Long time no see, Dan," I said, shaking his hand. "You look good. What brought you here?" "We stopped to see how the project was going, and of course, we were concerned about your condition," he replied. "How are you now?" "It's been better," I answered. "By the way, let me introduce you to my wife Karen and Avril Dumonte." Everyone shook hands and talked quietly while Dan told the women sea stories about my time on the Eisenhower. Although I enjoyed the visit, I suspected there was an ulterior motive. "I appreciate your visit, Dan," I said, "but I have a feeling that something else is going on." "There is a problem." "Actually, Professor, there is a problem," Lieutenant Patrick said, looking at the two women in the room with me. "Could you please explain?" I asked. "Of course," Lieutenant Patrick answered. "We have become aware that there is a potential security threat that could jeopardize this project." She turned to Karen. "For example, your wife had a long-term affair with a foreign citizen with a reputation as a ladies' man." She turned to Avril before continuing, who, by the way, was married to a convinced communist. "This is the type of scandal that a hostile foreign power could use to blackmail the head of a project like yours." Karen and Avril lowered their heads. "You're not hinting," I began. Dan raised his hand. "Nobody's hinting, Rob," he said. "I know you. I know what kind of person you are. It's just the type of thing that makes tongues wag. Next thing you know, congressional investigative calls are coming in and, well, you know what might happen next. Normally, we would have suspended the project until a full risk assessment was completed," Commander Marlowe said, "which, of course, would include a full psychological examination of the team leader, who had just suffered a serious medical incident related to his marriage." I knew what it meant. "But it could take months," I said, looking at Dan. "I know," he replied. "That's the other reason we came today. We stopped by the research facility to check things out, and as far as the Pentagon is concerned, you and your team met your contract goals ahead of schedule and within budget. Don't worry, you and your team will get paid in full, so consider it an early Christmas gift." I knew what it meant. The project was no longer in my hands. Now it will be completed by military engineers. Lisa, the rest of the team, and I were officially out of work. Another victim of Karen's betrayal. "I see," I said. "I think you will need my laptop and my accessible card." "Yes, that's true," Dan replied. "You can pick her up at home anytime," I said. "Karen knows where I keep my laptop bag." Dan looked at Karen. "We'll be home later this afternoon," she said. "You can come in at any time." "Thank you, Mrs. McDonald. I appreciate it." Dan turned to me. "Rob, you did a great job, as always," he said. "I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon. Get better, okay?" "I'll be fine, Dan, thanks," I said. They left after shaking hands and saying goodbye. I waited until the door closed before I said anything. "Well, Karen," I said, "is there anything else you want to ruin?" "Rob, I'm so sorry," she said. "I had no idea that something like this could happen. I hope you understand that if it had been anyone other than Dan, this incident could have become a national scandal," I said. "Quite a lot of people have lost their jobs because of this." Karen looked like she was about to say something, but there was a knock on the door. For a moment, I remembered the Old Men at Work song, "Who Can It Be Now, Doctor?" Alan peered through the door before entering. "How are you feeling today, Mr. McDonald?" he asked. "Better than yesterday, Doctor, thank you," I said. "Okay," he replied. "I just wanted to let you know that your tests show improvement, and if everything goes well, we will discharge you. You in a day or two." "So he will return home?" asked Karen. "I'm afraid not, Doctor," Alan replied. "I read the doctor's report Carstairs and agree with her assessment that Mr. Case McDonald needs rehabilitation in a relatively stress-free environment. Everything has already been arranged, and we are just waiting for the room to become free." "How long will it take?" she asked. It's hard to say, Doctor. Alan replied. At least a month. It all depends on how his body responds to the therapy. The most important part of his recovery is keeping his stress levels low. I hope you understand. I understand, she said quietly. Doctor. Alan said goodbye and left. Karen came up to me. Rob, do you think we'll ever be okay? She asked. I don't know, Karen, I answered. There's too much damage, and I keep wondering what's going to happen next. You would be a fool to reject your wife's love, Avril said. Karen raised her hand before Avril could say anything else. Leave him, she said. You heard the doctor. He needs to keep his stress levels low. I know my Rob. He will analyze it like everything else. He will make the right decision. I hope you're right, Avril said. Karen kissed me on the cheek. We'll be back, she said. For a moment, I imagined the Terminator making the same statement. I smiled to myself, nodding my head. I'll be here, I said. Do me a favor and bring my laptop when they're done with it, please. I'll bring it, she replied. They left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Karen was right about one thing. I will analyze everything carefully, but I have already decided what the end result will be. About an hour later, Lisa came into my room and told me about the events of the day. I take it you've heard about the project, she said. I heard, I replied. What happened? Well, the Admiral and his 2 assistants came out just as we started launching, she said. They wanted to know if we could start the engine. As it turned out, we could, and we launched it. Believe it or not, it fired right up, and before we knew what was happening, we were hitting over 90,000 pounds of thrust. It used a little more fuel than we'd like, but they said it wasn't a problem. Then they thanked us for our work, said we had done a good job, and announced that their engineers would take care of everything. They collected our passes, erased our laptops, and left. They didn't say anything else? I asked. She shook her head. No, she said, but I had a feeling something else was going on. It is, I said. Karen? She asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. We dodged a bullet, you know. If anyone other than Admiral Dickerson had been involved, we would have had to field a lot of awkward questions from very curious members of Congress, and also lose our permission to access classified information. I'm sorry that you and others lost their jobs. Don't worry about it, boss, she said. This had to end sooner or later. Have you decided what you're going to do with Karen? I've decided, I said. I just need more information about this Dumont. I keep thinking there's more to all this than I've been told so far. Just don't analyze it too much, Rob, she said. It's not an engine, you know. Do what you need to do and move on. Good advice, I said. She stood up to leave. You know, Rob, she said, if I ever decided to switch sides, you would be the man I would want to latch on to. Everyone in the group knew that Lisa preferred women to men. Thank you, Lisa, I said. It means a lot to me. Is it true? And thanks for the support. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. You're welcome, she said. I hope one day we can work together again. Me too, I said. I watched her go, then lay back on the bed. I was almost asleep when the nurse returned for my evening medications and a walk. When I returned, my evening dinner had already been delivered. By the time I finished, Karen returned with my laptop. Here's your laptop, she said. They got everything they needed from him. Thank you, I said, placing the car on the tray. Rob, she said quietly. I looked at her. Are you really going to throw away 26 years of marriage? That's the problem, I said. I'm not sure we've been a couple for the last 20 years or so. From my point of view, you were Philip's de facto wife all this time. I was in the house with you, and we were officially married, but he had your heart the whole time, and he still has it. I just don't understand one thing. What? She asked. You have shown no remorse for what you did, I said, and you described this romance as something beautiful and innocent. If it was as great and pure as you say, why did you feel the need to hide it from me all these years? I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. So you admit that it would hurt me? Interesting. But you should have known that I would find out one way or another, I said. I was hoping this wouldn't happen for many years, she said. Tell me something, I said. What? She asked. When you were with him, did you ever wish that you were with me? I asked. I always hoped that all three of us could be together, she said. But you never wished for me to be there instead, I asked. She lowered her head before shaking it. No, she said quietly. And when you were with me, I guess he was on your mind, I said. She nodded without saying a word. I see, I said. In other words, he took my place in your heart. I noticed something else. You and Avril seem very close. What's happening? You and her. She smiled and nodded. We have become very close, she said quietly, emphasizing the word very. This explained a lot. Not only did she cheat on me with Philip, but she was now sleeping with Avril. In fact, we were hoping you'd join us at some point. And the blows keep coming, I said. How long? Quite a long time, she said. She really gravitates towards you, you know. Don't you find her attractive? I found it, I said. There's just one problem, I added, showing off my ring. My ring was missing, but the imprint it had left on my finger was still visible. I'm still a little married, and as you know, I'm extremely monogamous. I know. Look, Rob, I'm really sorry I hurt you, she said. I never wanted this. I nodded. I'm starting to get tired, I said. She took the hint and stood up to leave. Please believe me when I say I love you, she said, kissing my cheek. I nodded again without saying a word. She left the room, wiping her eyes. The next day I was transferred to the rehabilitation department of the hospital. My new room was much larger than the one I had in the hospital and had more amenities. For starters, the bed was bigger and more comfortable. The room had a small refrigerator and a huge TV mounted on the wall. The facility also had excellent Wi-Fi, so I could use my laptop. I was put on a strict diet and exercise routine designed to restore my body. When I wasn't training, walking, or consulting, I was on my laptop researching Philippe Dumonte. I could understand why Karen's affair with him was seen as a potential security threat. It seemed that Philip was a real ladies' man, having been responsible for at least 6 divorces over the past 25 years. One of his victims was a high-ranking Canadian Army official. Several articles on the internet included photographs of Philip with 5 women at the same time, all of whom were called companions. Several of the photos were of Karen wearing outfits I had never seen her wear before. Some articles, by the way, called her his married American companion. She seemed so alive and happy in these photos, clearly not caring what anyone thought. As you might imagine, some of the comments on these articles weren't too kind to her. One comment read, "You mean married American woman of easy virtue fixed for you? Does her husband know about this?" I was almost tempted to answer, but decided not to. A couple of weeks after arriving at the rehab facility, I received a call from a friend, Kirk Ward, who worked for a company in Cincinnati. The company had worked extensively with General Electric, designing and building engines for military and commercial aircraft, and he said they were looking for an engineer for new projects. The only downside was that I would have to move to Cincinnati. I hated leaving Albany, but I didn't see a future for myself here. Kirk said they would expect me right after New Year's if I was free. I decided to accept his offer. Damn it, I thought. I don't have a job here, and I certainly don't have a marriage, so there's nothing holding me back. I haven't seen Karen or Avril much since I arrived, which was good from my point of view. The doctor made it clear to them that I needed to be stress-free, and since Karen's actions had brought me to the hospital, they needed to stay away from me. I had only seen them a couple of times so far, and that was fine with me. I did some research on divorce laws and decided to move forward with it, but I wanted to find a good lawyer to protect my assets. I spoke with several lawyers who came specifically to see me at the rehab center, and I was impressed with both of them. I checked them out and saw that they both had very good recommendations. All I had to do was decide which lawyer to choose. At the end of September, Karen and Avril came to visit me and told me that Avril's family, and I assume Karen's extended family, would be coming in October to celebrate Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving, that is. We would like you to come and be with us, Karen said. For what? I asked. This is your family, not mine. The boys will be there too, Karen said. I hadn't seen my sons for a while, so I said I'd talk to the staff and see if it could be arranged. We can come get you if you want, Karen said. I shook my head. No, I'll take a taxi if I go. When will it be? I asked. The second Monday in October, Karen said. We'll have turkey and stuffing and everything. Don't you want a good turkey dinner? It sounded attractive, but I had another idea. Sounds good, I said. Let's see. Dinner will be at 18:30, so we are waiting for you, she said. After they left, I spoke with the doctor responsible for my rehabilitation and received permission to go, provided that I returned that evening. I then called the lawyer I had chosen for my divorce and told him about it. Do you want her to be called at 6:30 p.m. on the second Monday in October? Asked Ron, my lawyer. Exactly, I said. We can arrange this, he said. Just curious. Why this particular date and time? I explained the reason to him, which made him chuckle. A little revenge, huh? He asked. Understand. Consider it done. I thanked him and ended the call. When the date arrived, I took a taxi and went home. I no longer considered the house to be my own from my point of view. It was Karen's house. I rang the doorbell, and a puzzled Karen answered it. Why are you ringing the doorbell? She asked. This is still your home. I didn't mean to be rude, I said. She took me inside and introduced me to everyone. The house was filled with 2 grandmothers, children, aunts, uncles, everyone. For a moment I was glad I wouldn't be staying here overnight. I barely spoke to Avril's family members, just enough so as not to seem rude. Honestly, I felt like an insect being observed through a microscope. I noticed my 2 sons and approached them. Good evening, Oscar, I said, shaking his hand. I'm glad to see you. Who is this with you? I asked, looking at the young man next to him. This is Mark, he said. Mark, this is my father, Robert MacDonald, he added, turning to Mark. Please call me Rob, I said, shaking his hand. I noticed that Oscar was a little nervous. Nice to meet you. Tell me, are you 2 dating? I asked. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. It was obvious that there was chemistry between these 2 young men. Mark and Oscar looked down for a moment. It's okay, I told them. I only care about my children being happy. Treat my son right, okay? They looked at me, clearly surprised that I was so frank with them. Mark smiled and nodded. I will, Rob, he said. I promise. I hugged Oscar tightly and patted him on the back. I love you, son, I said. Despite everything, never forget this. He smiled, looking at me. Thank you, Dad, he said. I love you too. I turned to my eldest son, Kevin, who was with a charming girl. When I looked at him, I realized that he would have been about 6 years old when Karen moved with Philip into our house and into my bed. How are you? I asked. He smiled, shaking my hand. Great, Dad, he said. I'm glad to see you. I looked at my watch. There are about 20 minutes left before the show. Are you waiting for someone? Kevin asked. His eyes widened as he realized. Are you going to give your mom the divorce papers? He asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. Listen, I know you two kept your mother's secret for 20 years. I don't like it, but I understand. I'm only asking for 20 minutes. But here, in front of the whole family? He asked. I hardly know these people, I said. They may be your mother's extended family, but they are not mine. But Dad, we're part of their family too, he said. They accepted us, and we got to know them well. I understand, I said. Only 20 minutes. That's all I ask. At exactly 6:30 p.m., the doorbell rang as everyone began to sit down at the table. I looked at Karen. I think this is for you, I said. She looked at me, puzzled, then walked towards the door. She opened it and saw a man in khaki and a light jacket. Mrs. Karen MacDonald? He asked. Yes, it's me, she said. He handed her a manila envelope and asked her to sign it. She signed where he indicated, then looked at him again. "You have been served with papers, ma'am," he said. "Have a good day." She looked into the envelope and immediately began to sob. By this time, everyone had gathered in the living room. "How dare you humiliate your wife like that? On Thanksgiving Day, on top of everything else, and in front of the whole family," Avril said, shocked. Everyone else looked at me, puzzled. None of them expected this. "How dare I humiliate her?" I asked sarcastically. "No, how dare she humiliate me the way she has for the last 20 years? Do you think this is humiliation? Try walking in my shoes for the last few weeks. What about the humiliation of learning that my wife of over 2 decades had slept with another man and his wife? What about the humiliation they were planning by exposing her betrayal to the whole world?" I stopped to catch my breath as I felt my blood pressure begin to rise. "Because of what she did to you and your husband, I lost my family," I said. "I lost my masculinity, my dignity, my job. I almost lost my life. My whole life for the last 20 years has been a damn lie. And do you know what's the worst thing about all this? Everyone in this house, except me and a couple of other people, knew about it, and not one of you raised a finger to stop it or let me know." I stopped to take another breath. By this point, everyone was silent. You could hear a pin drop in the house. "And what do you really know about your one true love, Karen?" I asked. "Did you know that he is responsible for at least 6 divorces?" I looked and saw many shocked faces, including Karen. "I also did some research, and guess what I found?" I asked. "The internet is full of articles about Philip, several of which refer to you as his married American companion. We all know what this means. The photos of you and him are very revealing. I don't think I've ever seen you so happy with me." I took a couple more breaths to control my blood pressure. "I made divorce easy," I said to Karen. "I filed for divorce due to irreconcilable differences, not adultery. I think I was more than fair. I'll leave you half of what we have in the bank. You keep your pension, and I will keep mine. The house is paid off, so it's yours to keep. All I want are my things and personal belongings. The rest is yours. I accepted a job offer in Cincinnati and will be moving there after completing my rehab. I suggest you find a lawyer to review the documents and then sign them. My lawyer's number is on the document card. Don't fight me on this, or things will get really ugly. I'll go back to the rehab center myself." "You're stupid, said Amy Lefevre, Avril's 81-year-old mother. "You have 2 women here who love you with all their hearts. Can't you put your pride aside and let them love you?" "Love me?" Karen literally broke my heart. "Is this what you do to the one you love? Like I told Avril?" I said. "A good marriage requires more than love. A good marriage requires respect, commitment, and trust. Karen showed me none of these qualities with her betrayal, and I refused to be a willing cuckold." By this point, everyone had lowered their eyes, ashamed. I decided I'd said enough, so I grabbed the truck keys that were hanging by the door. He turned, preparing to leave. "By the way, happy Thanksgiving," I said before walking out. I got into the truck and took a few deep breaths before starting the engine. Once I was sure I was good to go, I looked at the house one last time. "Goodbye, old friend," I said before driving away. This house was my home for over 20 years, and it was the only home Karen and I ever owned. We bought it at the beginning and spent a lot of time, effort, and money to bring it to its current state. I will miss it, but not the bad memories it now contains. I returned to the rehab center and lay in bed, tears streaming down my cheeks. I wiped my face and vowed to never cry for Karen again. This chapter of my life is now over. The next day after breakfast, I noticed several text messages on my phone. 2 of them were from my sons, condemning me for the way I humiliated their mother. It's a pity, I thought. They were aware of her infidelity from the very beginning. I understood that they were keeping her secret out of loyalty and a desire to please their mother, but at that moment I was not very happy with them. Karen sent me a text asking me to call off the divorce. This won't happen, I thought. I answered, no. When I returned from morning therapy, I saw a young couple standing at the door of my room. "Good morning," said the young woman. "I don't know if you remember me from yesterday, but I'm Simone, and this is my husband Georges." I vaguely remembered them from the previous day. Can we come in and talk? Sure, why not? I said. Sorry, but yesterday was a bit of a crazy day. If I'm not mistaken, you are Avril's daughter, right? Yes, she said. It was a bit of a crazy day. I was 13 years old when I first met Aunt Karen and your two sons. When she and Dad went back to Albany, I asked Mom if they were cheating on each other. She said yes, and that you knew about it and approved of it. I didn't quite believe it then, but I didn't say anything. Now I understand that you didn't know. No, I said. I trusted her all these years and never thought she would do something like this. I found out when your mother brought this painting into the house after your father died. It's terrible, she said. I'm so sorry for you. I'm really sorry. What's done is done, I said. I'm sorry I ruined your birthday dinner. No, it's okay, she said. He was a little reserved, though. Aunt Karen had set up a seat for you, and the empty chair said it all. You were right about most of what you said. We all knew, and none of us did anything to stop it. But not everyone approved of it. About? I asked. Oh, don't get me wrong, she said. I loved my dad, I still do. But I know he was what you would call a ladies' man. He took what he wanted, when he wanted. He loved my mother, and she loved him, so they stayed together. And yes, she also had lovers. I didn't approve of this, but there was nothing I could do. George's went through something similar, and I saw how much pain it caused him. It took him a long time to recover from that. At least I didn't end up in the hospital, George's said. I smiled at this. Is it true that her infidelity landed you in the hospital? Simone asked. I nodded. Yes, I said. It even has a fancy name. This is very similar to a heart attack. That's why I'm here. I'm so sorry, she said, placing her hand on my arm. I saw that she was sincerely sympathetic. It's okay, I said. They are putting me back together. When they're done here, I'll go to Cincinnati. You did the right thing by divorcing your wife, Georges said, and I applaud you for destroying that painting. But at some point, you will have to forgive your wife so you can move on. Trust me on this. Thank you, I said. I'm not ready to do this yet. Maybe after the divorce is finalized. Karen still doesn't think she did anything wrong. Maybe she'll change her mind, Simone said. Perhaps, I said, but I'm not going to stand by and wait for it. We talked for another half hour before they got up to leave. Please accept our invitation to visit us in Montreal someday, she said. Maybe for the holidays. You will always be a welcome guest. Thank you, Simone, I said. I appreciate it. Perhaps I'll come someday. Georges and I shook hands and Simone kissed me on the cheek before they left. After my day of therapy and consultation, I had another visitor, Avril, and she didn't look too pleased. Please, Avril, I said. If you're going to tell me that I should forgive Karen and take her back, don't waste your breath. Okay, she said. I won't. I just want you to know that she's hurting just as much as you are, perhaps even more. About? I asked. How can it be? I thought she had everything she wanted and a new family to boot. She cries every night, Avril said. She also has nightmares. Nightmares about your dead parents judging her for what she did. So she still has a conscience, I said. But it's a little late, isn't it? She loves you, Avril said. And to be honest, me too. Why can't you let us love you and heal your heart? As I thought about her words, I had an idea. You know, it just dawned on me, I said. You don't understand what I'm going through because you've never been in a committed relationship. This is ridiculous, she said. I was married to Philip for many years. You were married, it's true, I said. But let's admit it. Neither of you was faithful to the other. Both took lovers outside of marriage. You can't understand the concept of fidelity because you've never tried it. You can't know what it's like to love someone exclusively only to have them break your heart. It would be like me trying to explain a jet engine to someone who has never seen an airplane. What do you suggest? She asked. I'm just making an observation, that's all, I said. So are you really going to get a divorce, no matter what it does to your wife? she asked. Yes, I said. In the end, she gave herself to Philip for 20 years without thinking about what it would do to me. That's not true, she said. Karen has often said that she never meant to hurt you. She never disrespected you, and by the way, Philip too. Maybe not with words, but they both disrespected me with their actions and lies, I said. So this is your final word, she asked. I nodded. Almost, I said. She turned our marriage into a mockery, humiliated me, took away my masculinity and dignity. I must restore justice. It's a shame, she said. I'm really sorry. We could make beautiful love, the three of us. I smiled at this. I had no doubt that Avril was good in bed. She was certainly easy on the eyes. But there were principles here that she simply could not understand, and I'm tired of trying to explain it to her. Perhaps sometime in the future, she began. Not until I get divorced, I said. I'm still technically married, and I am exclusively monogamous. Avril kissed me before she started to leave. You didn't say no, she said, so there is hope. My rehabilitation has continued as planned, and my cardiac condition is stable. Improved. It helped that Karen and Avril finally decided to leave me alone for a while. About 2 weeks after that terrible Thanksgiving, I received a call from my lawyer on Monday. How are you feeling, Rob? He asked. Better, I said. I'm getting stronger. Why? What happened? Well, he began, Karen wants to meet with you one more time before she signs the papers. Is she challenging something? I asked. No, Rob, she just wants to talk to you one last time, he said. What do you think? I asked. What can hurt? He asked. Quick meeting, you stand your ground, let her speak. Then she signs. Okay, I said. Let's make this happen. Is it possible to do this here in the rehabilitation center? I don't see any reason why not, he said. I'll get a notary and we'll close this case. We made an appointment for 2 days in advance in my room at the rehab center and ended the call. I made sure I told the nurses so we wouldn't be interrupted. 2 days later, my lawyer and I were sitting in my room when Karen and her lawyer walked in. We introduced ourselves and I turned to Karen, noticing that she looked like she had been crying a lot. How are you holding up, Karen? I asked. What do you think? She asked. I told you that I would love you for the rest of my life, but apparently that's not enough for you, huh? You wanted this meeting, I said. So let's get down to business. She sat down and looked at me, spinning the rings. Straight to the point then, she said. Okay, Rob, I don't want this divorce. I want us to fix what's wrong, put it behind us, and move on. And how are you going to do this? I asked. Do you have a device that can take us back in time to the moment before we met Philippe Dumonte? Can you bring yourself back? Or do you think I should just ignore what you've been doing for the last 20 years? Don't be stupid, Rob, she said. I told you that I still love you, and I always will. Isn't that enough? No, I said. We've talked about this before. You think it was completely normal to cheat on me, to bring another man into our home and into our marital bed while I was at war, and to have our children lie to me the whole time. How can I trust and believe you again? Anything at all? You've become quite adept at lying over the past 2 decades. Rob, I promise I will never do anything like that again, she said. And should I believe you? I asked. Seriously, every time you walk out the door, I'll wonder if you're going to meet another Canadian artist. Every time you say something, I'll wonder if it's true. Do you not love me anymore? She asked. I never stopped loving you, I said. That's why your betrayal hurts so much. Believe me, it would be much easier if I hated you. I could just walk away and end it all. You just don't understand, do you? You said Philip was a good man. Tell me, what kind of person is responsible for 6 divorces? 7, if you count ours. Explain to me, please. I want to know. I understand that you are suffering, she said, and I understand that it's my fault, but can't you put it behind you and move on? You mean pretend it never happened, right? I asked. Pretend that 20 years of lies, betrayals, and deceit never happened. Pretend you never brought another man into our bed while my life was in danger abroad. Maybe you want me to pretend that photo never existed. Is there nothing I can say or do to change your mind? She asked. I shook my head. No, I said. What you did cannot be undone. Look, this is raising my blood pressure again. Please, you've had the meeting, so sign the papers, and let's end this sham of marriage. She lowered her head, wiping away a tear. After a few minutes, she nodded. Okay, Rob, she said. You won. I will sign the documents since you are so determined to throw away more than 25 years of marriage. I didn't throw anything away, Karen, I said. You did it the first time you slept with Philip. Karen wiped away a tear, then took a pen and signed the documents. The notary, whom my lawyer brought, stamped and signed the documents. My lawyer collected the documents and put them in his briefcase. I'll take it to court today, he said. You will receive the final decree in a few months. Thank you, I said. I turned to Karen. When my rehabilitation is over, I will come to pick up the rest of my things. I don't want much, just clothes, tools, and electronics. I'll call you and make arrangements. Okay, she said. Do you want my rings? I shook my head. No, I said. I gave them to you. Do with them what you want. I'm so sorry, Rob, she said. I still love you and always will. Please believe it. I nodded without saying a word. She left the room in tears. I signed documents giving my lawyer power of attorney to manage the bank accounts and other legal documents relating to the house. After about 3 weeks, I was discharged from rehab. By then, my lawyer had given me a check for half of our bank accounts. The doctors and counselors gave me my instructions, which basically boiled down to eat healthy, exercise, and keep your stress levels low. I called Kirk to let him know that I would be in Cincinnati soon, and he gave me the address of the apartment the company had given me. After calling Karen, I got in my truck, rented a small U-Haul trailer, and drove home. Karen answered after I rang the doorbell and let me in. She looked like she had aged 10 years since I last saw her. I walked in to find that she and Avril had already packed my clothes and electronics. A large TV stood next to the boxes. I checked the boxes and found that everything was neatly folded and packed. They even gave me some dishes, pots and pans for my new apartment, and Karen packed some pictures of our kids. We wanted to make sure you had everything you needed for your new place, Karen said. I thanked her for this. I loaded everything up and was surprised when they handed me a chest of food and drinks. What is this for? I asked. I wanted you to have enough food for the trip, Karen said, tears in her eyes. I put the chest down and opened my arms to hug her. She threw herself into my arms and held me tightly, sobbing. Oh God, Rob, she cried. I am so sorry. I will always love you. I held her tightly, remembering the last time we hugged like that as husband and wife. I will always love you too, I said. It was true. Even though she hurt me greatly, I knew that I would always have feelings for her. Avril came up to us and hugged us both, crying. We stayed like this for several minutes. I broke the hug and looked at them, tears threatening to fall from my face. I better go, I said. Okay, Rob, Karen said. Please let us know when you get there, and remember that we love you. I smiled and nodded. I'll call when I get there, I said. I left and saw them standing in the yard waving as I left. I got to my new place in Cincinnati, unpacked, and returned the trailer. I called Karen and gave her the new address. She ended the call by saying that they both love me. I settled into my new apartment and looked around. I always loved Albany, but I fell in love with Cincinnati. Kirk, aware of my personal situation, invited me to spend Thanksgiving with his family, and I graciously accepted the invitation. Christmas was a few weeks away, and it was the holiday I knew I would dread. Christmas has always been a special time for our family, and it felt strange and lonely not having anyone to celebrate it with. I decided to volunteer at a local homeless shelter over the holidays, thinking it would help take my mind off the loneliness. While serving food and talking to homeless families, I remembered what my grandfather once said. I felt sorry for myself because I didn't have shoes. Then I met a man who had no legs. This certainly applies here. I was surprised when I received a Christmas card from my sons, but even more surprised when I received one from Karen and Avril. It was captioned, "We both love you and miss you dearly." At first I felt bad because I hadn't sent anything to anyone. I called my sons who said Karen and Avril were in Montreal. I called Simone and George's and spoke to them, then spoke to Karen and Avril. "We love you, Rob," they said when I ended the call. I threw myself into the work and found it very therapeutic. I would hear from Karen periodically, and she would always end the call by saying she loved me. In mid-January, I was curious to know how their exhibition went, so I did a search. The reviews I read were somewhat mixed, with most critics calling it boring. Something told me that Avril didn't like it too much. By the end of April, I received the final decree of divorce. "Congratulations," my lawyer wrote on the sticky note. "You are a free man." Yahoo, I thought sarcastically as I opened my beer. My life consisted of work and a one-room apartment. Despite Kirk's best efforts, I wasn't ready for dating or going out often. The calls from Karen and Avril also stopped, which I really appreciated. One Thursday in mid-August, almost a year after Avril showed up on my doorstep with that nude portrait of Karen, I received an excited call from Kevin. "Dad," he said, "you need to go back to Albany." "Why?" I asked. "What's happened?" "This is Mom, Dad," he said. "She's in hospital and the doctors don't think she'll make it until the weekend." "What?" I asked. "What's happened?" "She was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer a few months ago," Kevin said. "They did everything they could, but nothing helped. She asks you, Dad. He wants to see you before he dies." I thanked him for letting me know and called Kirk, who gave me time off and said he would take care of the issues with HR. I packed a few things into the truck and drove off. When I got to the hospital, I saw Kevin and Oscar outside. They took me to their mother's room. "Thanks for coming, Dad," Oscar said. "Avril is with her, but she keeps asking you." "You're welcome, son," I said. "What do the doctors say?" "They say she has maybe a couple of hours left, no more," Oscar said. "She's conscious now, but not for long." When we approached the room, I was shocked. The beautiful woman I saw just a year ago has disappeared. She looked tired and haggard. Her eyes were red and sunken. She had lost almost all her hair and wore a gray turban on her head. She looked up when I entered. "Rob," she asked weakly, "is that really you? You came to me?" "Of course, Karen," I said, sitting down next to her. I noticed she was still wearing her wedding and engagement ring. She extended her hand to me, tears in her eyes. I hugged her as close as her Roman IV would allow. "Oh, Rob," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I was wrong, and I hurt you greatly. Can you forgive me?" I remembered what Georges had told me last year and realized that this was the first time she had admitted her guilt. I knew I had to forgive her, even if it was the hardest thing I've ever done. "See, I'm still wearing my wedding ring. I told you I would love you for the rest of my life." "I love you, Karen," I said, tears in my eyes, "and I forgive you." She started crying, and I cried with her. Avril took out a tissue and wiped her eyes. Karen took Avril's hand and placed it in mine. "Please, Rob, promise me that you will let Avril heal your heart," she begged. I looked at Avril, who smiled and nodded. "This is fine. We're not married anymore," Karen said softly. I nodded. "Okay," I said. "I promise." Karen smiled faintly before turning to Avril. "Please, Avril," she said, "treat my husband better than I do. Will you do this for me?" Avril wiped away a tear before answering. "I will, Karen," she said. "I promise." We all hugged and shed tears, and I could hear the boys sobbing as they watched us. "He's a monogamist and doesn't like to share," Karen Avril said. Avril smiled and looked at me. "I heard," she said. "Maybe he'll teach me something about loyalty and devotion." Karen smiled for a few seconds. Her smile disappeared and her eyes glazed over. I heard the change in her breathing and knew she wouldn't last long. I leaned towards her ear. It's okay, Karen, I said. We love you. She took a few more breaths and fell silent. I looked and saw that her eyes were completely wide. Alarms buzzed as the monitors showed a flat line, and the room quickly filled with medical personnel who examined her before declaring her dead. Avril, the boys, and I gathered in the corner of the room and mourned her death. Soon her body was taken from the room. The doctor came up to us. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "I understand that Mrs. McDonald wanted her body to be donated for cancer research. The hospital will arrange all the formalities for her transfer." We thanked him and left the room, still in shock. We returned to the house where Karen and I had once lived and sat in the living room drinking coffee. I never thought I would return to this place again. "What's happened?" I asked. "Karen got really depressed after you left," Avril said. "I did everything I could, but nothing helped. We went to Montreal for the holidays, but that didn't help either. She became immersed in the exhibition, but became even more depressed when it didn't go as well as we had hoped. The only time she was happy was when she talked to you." "Was she dating someone?" I asked. Avril shook her head. "No," she said. "She refused it, although I suggested it to her several times. About a month before the final divorce, she began to get sick. I suggested she go to the doctor, but she refused. She only went when she was too sick to work. By then it was too late. She was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer. They tried chemotherapy and radiation, but it was too late." "Damn," I said. "She should have told me something." "There was nothing you could have done, Rob," Avril said. "They talked about surgery, but by then the cancer had spread throughout her body. The only thing they could do was minimize her pain." "What about donating your body for research?" I asked. "She made this decision when she realized she didn't have much time left," Kevin said. "She discussed it with us and said this is what she wants to do. She didn't want her death to be a burden on the family and thought it might help someone in her situation." "Do you agree with this?" I asked. They nodded. "This is what she wanted," Oscar said. "I support her decision." I nodded. "Is there anything else I should know?" I asked. "Karen gave the house back to you," Avril said. "She also left everything to you in her will." "To me?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes," Avril said. "In her mind, you were still her husband, even after the divorce." She opened a drawer in the coffee table, took out an envelope, and handed it to me. "She wrote this for you shortly before she went into hospital for the last time." I opened the envelope and pulled out a paper with Karen's handwritten note on it. "My dear Rob," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here. I've had a lot of time to think about everything you said last year, and I've come to the conclusion that you were right and I was wrong about everything. First of all, I should never have opened up to Philip the way I did. I should have trusted you first, not him. But I didn't. I still don't know why, and I could never find a way to explain it in a way that you would understand or accept. And I should never have brought him into our home and into our marital bed. I now understand that this was completely unacceptable. Now I understand the consequences of what I did to you, including your relationship with our children, and yes, they are our children. I understand that I betrayed you and broke your heart. There are no words to fully express how sorry I am for everything I've done. I promised to love you until the end of my days, and I at least held back. This is a promise. I only hope that you can find forgiveness in your heart for everything I've done. I returned the house to you and decided to donate my body to medical science. I did this for two reasons. First of all, I don't want my death to be a burden to you. Secondly, my hope is that they can find a cure for this cancer so that no one else suffers like I have suffered these past few months. I also want you to find love with another woman who can love you the way you deserve. Avril has very strong feelings for you, and I really hope it works out for you. I'm really tired, so I have to go, but please remember, Rob, that I truly love you with all my heart, and I'm sorry for all the pain and suffering I've caused you." She signed the letter, "Your loving wife, Karen." I folded the note and put it back in the envelope. I looked at Avril, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "Have you read this?" I asked her. She shook her head. No, she said. I know that she wanted to express her regret to you. She was feeling guilty for the last few months of my life. She really was serious about the two of us? I asked. She nodded. Yes, she said. She was very serious. How do you feel about this? I asked. I'd like to try it, she said. We both lost a lot. Perhaps together we can ease each other's pain. She was right. I considered the possibility of a potential relationship with Avril. She was very beautiful, and it had been about a year since I had been with a woman. I also realized that I now had the opportunity to have sex with the wife of the man who took Karen. Poetic justice, perhaps. I looked at Avril before speaking. I have one question and one condition, I said. About, she asked. And what do you want to ask? I am exclusively monogamous, I said. I had never been with a woman before Karen, and I had never been with another woman. Never. I'm not inclined to share. Can you live with this? She smiled and nodded. Yes, she said. I can totally live with it. Karen and I talked about this too. I promise that if we are together, I will remain faithful to you. Well then, I have one condition, I said. Which, she asked. We'll replace the bed in the master bedroom, I said. March 2020. I just finished filling out my taxes for the year and took a closer look at my finances. The last 6.5 years have been quite exciting, to say the least. After explaining the situation, Kirk was able to arrange for me to work remotely 3 weeks a month from my home in Albany. I had to spend 1 week a month at the company headquarters to work with the designers on my teams. Avril kept her promise and even lived with me in my studio apartment in Cincinnati during the weeks I was supposed to be there. After what I experienced with Karen, I adopted the old rule: trust but verify. Avril understood my reasons and tried her best to gain my trust. Over the past few years, she has done much more than just love me. To heal the pain of Karen's betrayal, she has become my soulmate. Her family approved of our relationship and accepted me as Avril's companion. Even her children started calling me Papa Rob and considered my 2 sons to be their half-siblings. We spent many holidays in Montreal with our family, and they came to Albany to spend the holidays with us. They were smart enough not to mention the topic of Karen and Philip, at least in my presence. Avril not only taught me to love her, she taught me enough French to have an intelligent conversation. As I sat there looking at my finances, I remembered how I once told Karen that I wanted to retire at 60 and take her on a cruise around the world. Looking at my portfolio, I realized that I could do this now, and after some analysis, I realized that I had more than enough to not only enjoy this cruise, but to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I just didn't have a wife to share it with, at least not yet. I took a small box lying on my table and wondered if I was doing the right thing. How will this affect my work? Will she accept my proposal? After a while, I realized that I was overanalyzing the situation and decided to let things slide. To hell with it, I thought. It's time to stop analyzing and start living. I put the box in my pocket and took a bucket with a bottle of champagne that I bought earlier and 2 glasses. It's showtime, I said to myself as I walked up the stairs. Avril's squeal of delight when I offered her the ring was music to my ears. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.